Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Seema, for that introduction, and His Worshipful the Mayor of Goole for his introduction this morning. And it's great to be here in this building, which was called the Institute of Electrical Engineers, which I have a special relationship with, because my dad, who started life as an engineering apprentice in West London, ended up as a member of this institution, and some of his papers are up there somewhere in those libraries. I also want to say thank you to Seema, particularly for what she said about the need for bringing cohesion to our society, and the number of people that have told me and her, and indeed many other colleagues, just how frightened they are over the past couple of days, and some of the appalling comments that have been made in some places. We have to bring people together. The vote on Thursday to leave the European Union is an historic decision. This country has been a member for 43 years. Half the people of this country cannot remember ever not being part of the European Union. We're now in a world, and now there will be at least 2 years of discussions and negotiations before we're no longer members. We have to make sure that those negotiations deliver the protections this country needs: working rights, environment, human rights. We cannot let the Tories run riot over our hard-fought environmental protection regulations. I've no doubt that given the chance they would replace all our environmental safeguards with a Tory polluters charter. We're not going to let them do that, because we value our environment, because we value clean air, and because we recognise that if you pour polluted water into this river out here, it ends up in the Netherlands. If they pour polluted water in the Rhine, it ends up here. You can't do it alone. As if all that isn't enough, yesterday the Prime Minister resigned as well. So it's been a pretty remarkable couple of days by any reckoning. When I was elected leader of the Labour Party 9 months ago, it was, first of all, on the basis of opposition to the economic strategy of austerity, the cuts that are taking place, and the rolling back of the role of the state in public services. Secondly, it was in support of a more democratic, open politics, greater participation, greater democracy, and everyone having a say in how policy is made. And thirdly, for an international policy based on human rights and based on peace and based on political solutions rather than military solutions to conflicts. Outside the European Union, we will now need to forge new international relations and allies. I spent much of Thursday afternoon in between encouraging people in my constituency to vote in the referendum, speaking to leaders and prime ministers of socialist and Labour parties across Europe on just these 3 points, because I knew, remain or leave, many people felt that politics wasn't working for them. And I wanted to work with them to improve employment protection, human rights, and opportunities for all across the continent. Today, it's important that we learn from what has taken place in the past few days. If we are to draw the right conclusions and represent the people we were elected to serve more effectively. Across many parts of Britain, there's a feeling of powerlessness. Communities that have been abandoned from the mining industry's destruction onwards, where high-skill unionised jobs were lost in the 1980s or 90s and have not been replaced, or replaced by insecure, low-paid employment. Sport Direct factory on the site of a former mine says it all about the employment strategy of modern Britain. Where people feel behind in lower paid, less secure jobs, they are very concerned, and we are concerned for them. Where the deregulation of the labour market, combined with a lack of investment, hits the poorest hardest. It's many of these communities, former industrial heartlands, that voted to leave the European Union. Those communities have taken the full force of austerity and government economic failure. Local services have been hit the hardest there, while the richest got the tax breaks. If you overlaid a map of central government investment in local government with a map of poverty in Britain, they would be exactly the same. Those areas that have the deepest poverty, the highest levels of unemployment, the most insecure levels of employment for those in work, have also had the biggest cuts in central government support. The poorest borough in Britain on wages is Knowsley, on Merseyside. That has had by far and away the biggest cut in its local government support. The Tories' choice to make deprived communities pay for the crisis, not of their making, has opened the door for a very nasty, divisive form of politics in this country. That divisive politics has sought to blame immigrants, not government. Governments that let industries go to the wall, that fail to invest, that have deregulated the labour market and turned a deaf ear to the communities that have been left behind. I want to be very clear. The chronic housing crisis across this country is a direct result of this government's housing policies, selling off public housing whilst failing to build homes for all or provide secure tenancies for those in the private rented sector. We need laws that provide security and housing for all. And so the government referendum revealed a very divided Britain. London and Scotland voting strongly for Remain, Wales and every other English region voting to leave. But there is another divide between the thriving, often multicultural cities that were more likely to vote Remain and often post-industrial, smaller urban areas that voted to leave. Yesterday, people awoke to the turmoil of the markets and the pound sliding in value very rapidly, biggest fall for several decades. Before the referendum, George Osborne threatened an emergency budget if people voted to leave. He threatened to hike their taxes and cut public services. I don't know if he's going to do that, but it clearly is on an agenda somewhere. Labour will not allow that to happen. That would damage our economy still further and deepen divisions in this country even further. Our Shadow Chancellor, who works very closely with SEMA, John McDonnell said yesterday, the government must now take steps to stabilise the economy, to protect jobs, pensions and wages. Labour will not allow any instability to be paid for by the working people of this country. That is a very important point. We can't duck the issue of immigration. It clearly was a factor. Instead, we need to start an honest and rational debate. We cannot talk about immigration as something separate from its social and economic context, both for communities that are here and those that arrive. It's clear from the conversations that I and many others had on streets around the country in recent weeks that immigration is a crucial issue for a lot of people and played a central role in the EU referendum campaign. Opinion polls have told us for many years that it's one of the biggest issues people face. In fact, it's been in the top 5 on opinion poll questions since 2011. Politicians are often accused of being afraid to talk about it. I'm certainly not. I believe that migration has enriched our country, our culture and our communities. And I want to thank those people that have come here. And worked so hard in our health service and many other very important caring, science and transport industries. But I also understand that rapid changes to communities can bring tensions and strains on services. During the referendum campaign, I talked about the pressure that fast-moving changes on population can put on already underfunded public services. That's why Labour backed the restoration of the Migrant Impact Fund to relieve pressures on local services and provide rapid, necessary financial support to local health services and local government in areas where there's been a big influx of people to come and make their homes there. That fund was established by Gordon Brown in 2008. It only sadly lasted 2 years because David Cameron and the coalition government abolished it in 2010. We recognise too that there can be tensions in the jobs market. And so, we proposed amendments to employment rights here in Britain, such as the the banning of 0 hours contracts. "18 countries across Europe have banned 0 hours contracts. Even in the twilight days of our membership of the European Union, we could at least do that and ban 0 hours contracts here. There is also the Posting of Workers Directive, which has a loophole in it, which has been exploited by companies. What they do is pick up a workforce from a lower paying economy in Eastern Europe, move them lock, stock and barrel to this country, undercutting local agreements, undercutting local wages, giving those workers very poor pay and very poor conditions, thus creating a tension locally, thus damaging local employment conditions and local agreements, and sometimes industry-wide agreements. And of course, who benefits from that? The company that's brought them over here, the grotesque profits that are made on the back of that grotesque level of exploitation. Let's call it out for what it is: exploitation of people who are desperate to work. Instead, control that and invest in jobs and services. We have to address the needs of people and places that have been left behind by building an economic strategy that works for all, in all parts of this country. I know that Seamus Malhotra and John McDonnell are doing just that. And we have to move beyond the irresponsible debate that we sometimes have that makes people afraid, or that accuses people of being Little Englanders or racist just because they raise the issue. It is clear that the vote on Thursday, and from people across Britain, that there has been a backlash against the free movement of people across the 28 nations in Europe. But there was no single offer from the Leave side, and some of them wanted to leave but keep the single market and free movement, others did not. In fact, there was no manifesto of what a post-referendum UK Britain would look like on any of these important policy areas. Our policies on trade, economy and migration will have to change in light of the referendum vote. But that cannot be left to the likes of Johnson, Farage and Gove. Labour will fight to ensure that our agenda is at the heart of the negotiations over withdrawal from the European Union that lie ahead, including the freedom to shape our economy to work for all, maintain social and employment protections that benefit all, and that whoever leads the government is intensely held to account, to democratic account throughout the whole process. The whole country's got to come together in the wake of what has been a very divisive referendum campaign. Discuss the consequences calmly and rationally, and I want Labour to lead that debate. We will be discussing migration. Andy Burnham is dealing with that, and our Shadow Immigration Minister, Keir Starmer, is travelling around the country collecting evidence and will produce a report on that. But we need to talk about much, much more. The economy, skills, training, investment, industries and communities, employment and trade union rights, and our trade with Europe and the rest of the world. Half of our exports go to Europe. We have to have an economic relationship with Europe, and we have to negotiate that very, very fast. Our country must play a positive role in the international community. I explained at the beginning that one of the pillars that I stood on for leadership of the Labour Party was about human rights and international relations. We are signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights. We are bound by the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. We are obviously signed up to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations. There are many who would want to leave the European Convention, end our relationship with the European Court of Human Rights, and fail to realise that our human rights, in part, are dependent on that convention, that court, and the Human Rights Act that a Labour government passed in 1998, and I was very proud to support that government in passing that piece of legislation. We will not allow this government to ride roughshod over the protections of every person living in this country has from the European Convention. We will maintain our moral authority to criticise countries that destroy and damage human rights because we accept the international conventions ourselves. The Labour Party, and indeed the whole history of the Labour movement in Britain, is one of an international outlook. We will hold the government to account through its responsibilities, through the Department of International Development, and support our aid and development work, and ensure that the leaving of the European Union does not mean the end of many of the programmes that we're jointly involved in with the European Union. Diane Abbott, our Shadow DFID Secretary of State, is working very hard on that. When we had the leadership election last year, I was elected leader of this party on a programme that would ensure party policy was about the redistribution of power and wealth in this country. Inequality is the issue of our times. The growing gap between the richest and the poorest, and the way in which the proportion of wages as a proportion of gross domestic product is reducing in comparison to those of the very richest. We must face it and act decisively against it. We must never pander to prejudice in the debate that we're doing. We stand for communities coming together. So as we begin in the coming weeks and months to negotiate in all its complexity our exit from the European Union, we must debate the Britain that we want, that will be shaped by how that exit that takes place. An economy that provides good jobs in all parts of the country, because there is a government that invests in communities, in industry and its people. That was what the Labour agenda will have to be. We don't want whole communities left behind, former mining villages that have had very little or no investment in them, and all the problems that comes from that. The Labour vision is about justice, is about equality, is about public investment, is about housing for all, is about decent education for all. Above all, it's about opportunities for all. The young people that voted overwhelmingly to remain on Thursday must not be shortchanged by this decision. Those young people that voted in such large numbers must know that their future is at the heart of everything we do. It's good schools, it's colleges, it's education, it's universities, it's training, it's opportunities. It's opportunities to be able to share in the wealth rather than being told by successive generations, your generation is going to be worse off than ours and the one after that is going to be even worse off. Surely it's our duty as a Labour Party and a Labour movement to inspire those young people to take part in politics, to take part in developing ideas and policies, to take part in building a world of decency and human rights and building a country of equality and opportunity for all, not just for the favoured few. Thank you very much.